You scroll through your phone, you see headlines, maybe you read a long article sometimes. News is just everywhere, isn't it?
Ah,
Shaping how we see things. Okay, let's really get into this. Today, we're doing a deep dive into journalism itself. It's, well, it's under a lot of pressure, but it's also showing some incredible strength. We want to explore the threats, really understand why it's so vital for, a healthy democracy, and look at how journalists and, frankly, all of us are fighting back.
yeah, and for this deep dive, we've pulled together insights from quite a range of places. We're talking analyses from groups like the Global Investigative Journalism Network, the Institute for Nonprofit News, the American Press Institute, and also the Committee to Protect Journalists. They work globally on press freedom. We've also looked at critiques from academics and journalists focusing on media and democracy. And what's really striking, is this common thread running through everything, just how essential journalism is for public discussion
Hmm.
and how its challenges are really tangled up with the health of our society.
Exactly. And this isn't just some abstract thing about the media industry. This deep dive is really about you, the person listening, the citizen. What does all this change mean for the information you actually get? From the decisions you make, how does that affect your ability to engage with your community, your country? That's what we're trying to figure out. So maybe before we jump into all the challenges, let's just pause and remember why this is so crucial. What does a free, strong press actually give us?
Well, it's a fundamental pillar, really. It plays several key roles. First off, journalism is a watchdog, a critical one. It keeps an eye on governments, on powerful institutions, making sure leaders are ideally working for the people. That means uncovering corruption, tracking where public money goes. And our sources actually show a connection there. More media scrutiny. Higher chance officials under investigation might resign.
Right. So it's not just about pointing fingers, it's about actually encouraging integrity. But it's more than just keeping power in check, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You need an informed public for democracy to work, period. Journalism provides that diverse information you need to make smart choices, like when you're voting, or even just figuring out what's going on in a really complex world. And that process, it helps foster critical thinking, open discussion. When you see different viewpoints laid out, it pushes you to question the main story, maybe see things differently. Historically, that's been huge for social change. Think about the civil rights movement, how counter narratives were used to challenge racist ideas and really shift public opinion.
That's such a powerful point. And it's not just theoretical, right? The sources you looked at show actual, tangible benefits, even economic ones.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Take investigative reporting. The economic impact can be pretty significant. Sources suggest that, every dollar spent on uncovering stuff can actually generate hundreds of dollars in benefits for society. How?
Wow.
By exposing corporate fraud, cutting down government waste. There's even a stark example cited where cities that lost their newspapers ended up facing higher long-term borrowing costs. That hits citizens directly in the wallet because there was less scrutiny on local deals.
Wow, that's a hidden cost I hadn't really thought about. And beyond the money, local news seems especially vital in crisis.
It's absolutely crucial. Local news is key for community resilience. Think about disasters, protests, pandemics. Local journalists are providing that critical, sometimes life-saving information on the ground. In fact, epidemiologists apparently rely on local papers to spot and track disease outbreaks. Without that local reporting, they're basically flying blind, as one source put it. And here's something really fascinating. It's not always about the huge investigations or breaking crisis news. Even something as seemingly small as a local newspaper's editorial stance can actually help slow down political polarization among its readers.
How does that work?
By keeping the focus more on local issues, things happening in the community, rather than just echoing the national partisan fights, it acts as this subtle but powerful force for keeping people connected locally.
Okay, so if journalism is this indispensable, this vital, what happens when it comes under attack? That seems like the next logical question. Let's unpack the pressures journalism is facing right now. It sounds like a lot, from politics to tech shifts.
It is a lot. We've definitely seen a concerning rise in, let's call it, political hostility towards the press. Sources detail this consistent pattern of rhetoric, personal attacks. It goes beyond just criticism. It often seems aimed at delegitimizing the media altogether. For instance, the sources point to Donald Trump's repeated use of phrases like enemy of the people or fake news when referring to critical coverage. The analysis suggests this wasn't just off the cuff. It was a strategy to erode public trust in information that didn't fit his narrative. It sort of tries to turn facts into just another partisan opinion.
And this kind of language, it doesn't just stay as words, does it?
Uh-huh.
It seems to have real-world, pretty chilling effects.
Unfortunately, yes. The sources highlight an alarming trend where physical danger and harassment towards journalists have become more tolerated, particularly within certain groups. We've seen reporters at rallies being physically pushed, shouted down, insulted. There are even documented cases of swatting, where someone makes a fake emergency call to send armed police to a journalist's home, specifically targeting them for their reporting.
That's terrifying.
It is. And during the January 6th Capitol riot, sources report at least 18 journalists were assaulted. Someone even etched "Murder the Media" on a door inside the Capitol. It underscores how serious things have become. Some reporters, believe it or not, now wear flak jackets just to cover events. That tells you something grim is happening.
A truly chilling development.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond the rhetoric and the physical threats, you mentioned sources detailing how government levers, legal actions are also being used against the press. What does that look like?
It looks like a kind of strategic pressure campaign. We've seen things like restricting press access. One example cited was the Associated Press being temporarily blocked from White House events for not using specific administration-preferred language. The structure of the press pool itself was also reportedly changed to exert more control. Then you have regulatory bodies being drawn in. Sources mention the FCC chairman initiating investigations into networks and even threatening to block media mergers based on companies having diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Yeah, and this reportedly followed actions like, for instance, Trump pursuing a massive personal lawsuit against CBS over a 60 Minutes interview. Even if legal experts deemed it baseless, these kinds of suits can be incredibly costly and intimidating for news outlets. And it wasn't an isolated incident. Sources point to a history of similar defamation suits against other major outlets. Add to that efforts to cut funding for public broadcasting, like NPR and PBS, and reports of federal agencies deleting public data. It all paints a picture of reduced transparency and increased pressure.
So, summing that up, beyond these direct political moves, what about the broader information environment? Sources also point to problems tied to technology and who owns the news outlets.
Exactly. That's another huge piece of the puzzle. There's this big challenge with depending too much on tech platforms. Some call it digital sharecropping. Journalists basically build their presence on platforms like Substack, Google, TikTok.
Right, putting all their eggs in one basket.
Precisely. And that makes them incredibly vulnerable when those platforms change the rules. We saw Meta ban news links in some places, X throttling links. Meanwhile, the platforms are making the serious money, while the journalists take on all the risk of building a business there. And now there's a new threat, AI chatbots. The danger is people using AI summaries instead of reading the original reporting. Sources are really warning against this, saying it further weakens the whole information system if we replace independent journalism with automated summaries.
Yeah, I can see how that shortcut could be tempting, but ultimately damaging. And it's not just the tech platforms causing issues, it's also about who actually owns the newspapers and websites.
That's definitely a concern raised in the materials we reviewed. The rise of billionaire owners, figures like Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post or Patrick Soon-Shiong at the LA Times, has reportedly led to situations where, for example, editorials critical of certain interests were allegedly killed, or where suggestions were made for things like AI-powered bias meters. It just raises serious questions about editorial independence. Are news decisions being made for journalistic reasons or for other business or political interests?
Right.
And all of this, it feeds into the ongoing decline of local news. We keep coming back to this, but it's critical. Sources describe a hollowing out of American newspapers over the last 30 years. The result, people know less about local politics, they're less interested in participating, and there's way less accountability for local officials. It creates this damaging cycle. Ill-informed citizens, less legitimate local decisions, and governments that aren't really watched closely.
Okay, that paints a pretty bleak picture, I have to admit. But the sources don't just leave it there, do they? They also talk about pushback, about resilience. It sounds like journalists, organizations, and maybe even, us listening have roles to play.
Absolutely. It's not all doom and gloom. There are powerful countercurrents. Collaboration is emerging as a really key strategy. The sources we looked at show these partnerships yield countless benefits. We're talking more accurate, more impactful reporting. It offers protection for journalists too, especially when tackling dangerous subjects. And it makes stories possible that maybe no single outlet could do alone. Think of huge projects like the Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers. Those involved hundreds of journalists across the globe.
Right. Pooling resources makes a huge difference.
It really does. And collaboration can also strengthen defenses against legal attacks and spark innovation. The Global Investigative Journalism Network actually has this great list, 10 tips for successful collaboration.
Oh, anything stand out?
Yeah, one I thought was particularly interesting is embrace a radical sharing attitude. Basically, no holding back your best stuff. Share those golden nuggets before publication. Be totally transparent within the team. It's about building trust through genuine openness, which is so important when you've got maybe different personalities, different cultural backgrounds, varying levels of experience, all trying to work together. It takes patience and pretty agile management.
That sounds like really practical advice for journalists trying to navigate these complex projects. And it seems like the ways people collaborate are evolving too, with new kinds of structures popping up.
For sure. We're seeing the rise of what are called journalist collectives, places like Defector, 404 Media, Flaming Hydra. These are often structured differently, maybe as co-ops. The idea is they offer readers more writers for their money and potentially create healthier, more sustainable working environments for the journalists themselves through shared ownership. Then there are these things called backbone organizations. Think of groups like Resolve Philly or the Center for Cooperative Media. They don't do the reporting themselves, but they provide crucial support administration, coordination, helping build trust, managing expectations within these collaborative networks.
That sounds really useful, especially if you're trying to bridge gaps between, say, big legacy newsrooms and smaller community outlets that might have felt overlooked in the past.
Exactly. They can be vital for overcoming historical mistrust. And another really interesting development is seeing collaborations between local media and influencers, trusted community figures or online creators sharing solid, nonpartisan journalism. It helps build relevance, especially with younger audiences, making news feel more accessible and authentic within specific communities.
Okay, so there's a lot happening on the journalism side, but this brings us back to the listener, right? What can you actually do? It feels like individual actions must matter here too.
They matter immensely. Your support as a news consumer is crucial, and it can happen in a few ways. First, there's direct financial support, if you're able. Think about donating to nonprofit newsrooms, places like ProPublica, the Institute for Nonprofit News, investigative reporters and editors. Or subscribe. Support independent writers you value, maybe join one of those journalist collectives, or subscribe to traditional outlets, even if it's just for a specific project you believe in.
Supporting public radio and TV too, presumably.
Yes, absolutely. Supporting NPR, PBS, is vital. And also, consider giving to press freedom organizations, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, the Committee to Protect Journalists. They're on the front lines, funding legal fights and advocacy. Second, it's about how you engage in your own sort of information hygiene. Demand transparency from your government. Use freedom of information requests, push for open meetings, ask your local officials why they aren't answering press questions promptly.
Be an active citizen, essentially.
Exactly. Share good journalism when you see it, especially local news, to help it cut through the noise. And be conscious of your digital habits. The sources specifically say, do use social media that doesn't actively suppress links to news Bluesky is mentioned as an example. And don't rely on AI chatbots or summaries as a replacement for actually going to the source, reading the original information on independent sites.
Those are very concrete actions. And beyond what we can do individually, what about the bigger picture? Policy changes.
Yes, policy is essential for creating a supportive environment. Advocacy matters. Things like supporting a federal shield law that protects journalists from having to reveal confidential sources. And pushing for strong anti-SLAPP laws, those protect against strategic lawsuits against public participation, basically frivolous lawsuits designed to silence critics by draining their resources. Policymakers could also look at things like wage subsidies for local journalists or rules requiring a certain amount of government advertising spending to go to local media outlets. These kinds of measures can provide crucial economic support.
So when we pull all this together, it feels like we're really talking about a struggle over the narrative itself, doesn't it? When journalism functions properly, it's not just reporting facts, it's offering those crucial counter-narratives we talked about earlier.
Precisely. That's the deeper significance. Counter-narratives are powerful because they democratize the conversation. They encourage critical thinking by presenting different angles, pushing us to question the dominant story. That leads to a public that's more informed, more engaged. That's often where real social change starts. The challenge, of course, is that these counter-narratives often face pushback. People in power might try to co-opt them or discredit them, so it takes constant effort, constant vigilance, and smart ways of getting those alternative perspectives out there.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we've mapped out a landscape where journalism's vital role is kind of being celebrated and attacked at the exact same time. From reporters facing threats just for doing their jobs to big news organizations fighting legal battles, the stakes for the quality of information you get are incredibly high.
But we've also seen real resilience, haven't we? The power that comes from collaboration, the absolutely critical support from people who engage with and support the news, and that ongoing push for better policies to protect press freedom. These aren't just vague hopes, they're actual strategies, pathways towards a stronger information future for everyone.
So what does it all boil down to for you listening right now? I think it means your choices matter a lot. Where you decide to get your information, whether you support it financially or just by sharing it, how actively you demand transparency. All of that directly shapes the future of our democracy. Your engagement isn't optional, it's really essential. And maybe here's a final thought to chew on. Considering all these pressures, especially on traditional and independent media, what if the most powerful social media platform of the future isn't some tech giant? What if it's actually a deeply connected, maybe decentralized network, a network of local journalists working together, collaborating, alongside engaged citizens like you, everyone acting as a vital part of a more authentic information ecosystem? What might that actually look like? And how could you help build it?